We are closing this workshop with a roundtable on the discussion on possible safe by design legal approaches. And in order to go through that topic, we have 6 panelists who will all cover different aspects and, of course, interact to the greatest extent possible within the very short time frame we have for such topic in a roundtable at the end of a workshop that is already entering into its 6th hour. We have Professor Andrew Nelson, who you know already from the first presentation today on the project. Andrew graduated in chemistry and zoology and has a PhD, did his PhD in analytical geochemistry. Among his numerous activities, he's chair of the Nano Safety Cluster Working Group E, focusing on innovation and safer by design. We have also Professor Maja Dusinska. She is a researcher at the Norwegian Institute for Air Research, and she's a specialist of genetic toxicology. We have Dr. Igor Linkov. He's a senior science and technology manager at the United States Army Engineering Research and Development Center, and also a consultant for Factor Social. He's assisted with Dr. Benjamin Trump, who has a PhD in public health from the University of Michigan. And the two of them have co-authored more than a year ago a book on a monograph published by Springer. We will speak later on risk and resilience. We have Mr. Ignacy Gisbert. He is a lawyer and graduated also in European Studies. He's the CEO of Applied Nanoparticles and a specialist of environmental law. And the only panelist who is not a member of the project, but very familiar to many of you, is Professor Fernand Dorido, professor at ICAM, the Engineering School of the Catholic University of Lille, and professor expert on philosophy of science. So we have a large, I would say, panel, 6 different profiles, and myself, Anthony Beauchamp, attorney at law, associate lecturer and PhD candidate at the University de Bruxelles in Brussels, Belgium, as moderator. I will start first with a question for Fernand Dorido, and my first question for him will be, and you have just seen the presentation from Professor Ira Rubinstein, that we have some comparisons we can make. And my question to Fernand Dorido is the following. With the development of privacy by design and its integration in hard law legal text, we have seen a good example of how a concept which emerged as a technology topic became a legal principle. And this raises the following more fundamental question. Why do we ask ourselves and imply that legal systems should turn non-legal issues into legal definitions and regimes?
So, thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much, Anthony, for this invitation. And I'm trying to reply to your question. I have allowed myself to prepare a few words for trying to reply. So I suppose that you are referring in this question to the integration of the privacy by design principle into the GDPR regulation in particular. And this is indeed for me, yes, this is indeed an interesting example for a comparison with the case of the safe by design principle, of course. Very generally, I would say that the non-legal principles, whether they come from technologies or other, become legal principles from the moment when the current legality is put in default or is no more sufficient, of course, and when all the current legal principles do not allow to face a new situation. Indeed, which will be indeed the case if people got sick from the development and the use of nano-enabled products. And this is exactly what happened with privacy by design principle and the GDPR regulation since the development of issues in terms of use of private data was not covered enough by the current regulation. However, to be sincere, I'm not perfectly sure that the example of privacy by design can be a perfect example to think about safe by design, and that the lessons drawn from this example can be applied identically to the case of safe by design. From my point of view, there are many reasons pleading for this distinction, and one of them is that it's probably easier to define safety than to define privacy. And if you have a look at the GDPR regulation about privacy by design, you can see that the principle of privacy by design is not as such a measure of protection of the personal data. It is rather a general principle reminding companies of the need to provide basic protection measures from the design of a project involving the processing of personal data. So, in fact, in the case of privacy by design, you have a great place for the interpretation of this principle in the law. And I'm not sure that in the case of safe by design, such a place for interpretation will be allowed in the same proportions. Of course, it has to be discussed, but I'm not at all a technical expert in terms of safe by design, but I had the feeling that safe by design, not only being a risk management methodology, can also provide some technical methods, some recipes for making safer nanoproducts. And I had the feeling that the legalization of the safe by design principle would mean that these different methods and recipes will become mandatory. But maybe I'm wrong on this point. It can be discussed, of course. But just just to conclude, if I can say a few words on the legalization of the safe by design principle itself, from my point of view, I would see some advantages and some disadvantages to this legalization. Concerning the advantages, I would mention the following ones. First, of course, I think that the legalization is a good thing if it is an efficient thing, if it has for consequence that the products put on the market are safer for the human health and for the environment. Safe by design, you know, is also sometimes accused to be a kind of greenwashing politics for companies trying to avoid or to escape to regulation. And from this point of view, legalization will be a good thing. But concerning the disadvantages, I would say generally that each time you legalize something, you remove some kind of responsibility to the actors and to the stakeholders. You deprive the actors of some kind of responsibility. And it is quite problematic since safe by design as such, by trying to implement safety already in the design, was already itself a mean to deprive the actors of some kind of responsibility. So just to conclude, from my point of view, let's legalize some risk mitigation methods if it can be proved more efficient, but also let's work on the responsibilization and to the empowerment of the actors able to deal with things like safety.
Thank you very much, Fernand, for to provide this detailed answer and your even personal opinion on the matter. And I'm now turning to our lawyer on the panel, Mr. Ignacy Gispert, by asking him, what distinction do you make between the safe by design approach and core principles of environmental law, namely the prevention and precautionary principles, which we discussed a bit earlier today?
In fact, my first point would be just to repeat what you said this morning. The precautionary principle is a principle of community law, while the safety by design, as per today, is just an approach in the making. So basically, one is a compulsory regulation, the other is just a strategy. Going a little bit further on that and how I see that links, I would say that it's clearly that the European Court has clearly stated where and when the precautionary principle can be applied. Let's say that for me it's important to give the image that, say, the precautionary principle is not the idea to be better safe than sorry. That is, for me, is not the precautionary principle. And the European Court, what they have said in several court rulings is that when we have the risk, and I read that, we have the risk of a serious and irreversible damage to health and the environment deemed unacceptable to society and supported by solid and objective scientific reasons, even if uncertain. I would say that just with that explanation, we can see that nowadays probably the precautionary principle has become more a political tool than a governance tool. But this is another issue to discuss in another moment, probably. But what I think it's important is that the precautionary principle is not just a nice wording, but has a specific obligations placed to the European Union and in fact to the Commission also. And that is the obligation of taking measures, appropriate measures to deal with the risk through the risk management. Risk management that has to be proportionate, non-discriminatory, consistent, etc. So let's say that it's not just the precautionary principle, it's not just a principle meant to forbid something or someone to do something, but it's a set of different actions that the administration can take. That could be to satisfy or minimize possible risk and not be satisfying just with monitoring what is happening, but also means to put money in toxicology and ecotoxicology research, as the Commission is doing. But also the implementation of the precautionary principle means organizing the collection of information, or also means proactively engage in soft law mechanism or international cooperation, and also means to promote the development of safe nano innovations. And that is where I think we can find a link, that from all the different tools that represent the implementation of the precautionary principle, I have the feeling that perhaps the missing one in nanotechnology field is the promotion of innovations with purpose. It's the idea of being convinced that nanotechnology can deliver good things to society. And is pushing the innovation to society. As far as I can see in REACH, we only have kind of one promotional item, that is when a substance is included in the list of substances of very high concern, that then it has been proved that inclusion sparks innovation to look for alternatives. But it's the only promotion that I can see as per today. And it's a promotion coming after nearly a prohibition. So it's a way of saying, okay, it's a kind of promotion. So my conclusion here would say the precautionary principle asks for action, in the world and require proactive measures within the research and innovation stage and during the life cycle, from cradle to cradle. That is my feeling. But then is when Safe by Design offers that framework to develop such objective. So it's a kind of, for me, safety by design can be seen as a tool for implementing the precautionary principle in a promotional way of nanotechnology innovations. And also in that sense, safety by design can, because it's very centered in the world innovation change, can have a link between the precautionary principle and the newly born innovation principle, in kind of that safety by design can be like a hinge, helping to reconcile that both kind of principles. And I think I leave that there.
Thank you very much, Ignacy, for this answer that was also very detailed. And I'm now turning to Andrew Nelson by asking him that, as a scientist and inventor of several patented inventions,
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'll read the question. It's interesting. Am I
Yes, indeed.
worried that turning safe by design into a legal principle will entail a shift in the liability of exposure from
Yes.
industrialists to scientists themselves?
Yes.
Well, I'm really going to speak about this in terms of a scientist, because I have been involved indeed in innovation and patenting procedure for a long time. But I really call on a lawyer to kind of help me on the legal side, but on the philosophical side and in terms of liability, it's an extremely interesting question. And I remember in transferring our technology from our lab and development, actually for 30 years, to companies, we had to enter into an agreement with the industrial end user. So it depends very much on this agreement between the scientist and the industrial end user. So as a scientist, one doesn't just talk with an industry partner and they take it over and there's no agreement at all. You have to go through an extensive legal agreement. And in the UK, it's called a Heads of Terms Agreement on, very importantly, the ownership of the IP, the transfer of the license, and also who gets the royalties and so on. But I'm sure, and I'm not being involved in detail, I had a representative from the university who dealt with this very much in detail, but there must be a clause in it on the legal liability of exposure risk. I do know that when we work with companies in these EU framework projects, particularly in the last one, Hisense, and the present one, there was a section on a risk from what we were doing. And I'm sure that in these heads of terms agreements, there's got to be a clause saying that all the risk will be transferred to the particular company to whom we are transferring the technology to. I have never known a case where the scientist, up to now, I might be wrong, but I haven't known a case where a scientist develops something and then subsequently that technology is transferred to an end user, and the scientist actually takes the risk if things go wrong, and things certainly go wrong. I think it's a case, first of all, we have to look at the various case studies, and we used to do this in our philosophy course. And I always like to think of pharmaceutical development, because pharmaceutical development follows this adage of safety by design, in that the pharmaceutical is always developed by a scientist working in an academic institution. And if the pharmaceutical, particular drug or even chemical shows promise, they then market it out to a particular company, and maybe some clinical trials have already been performed. We discussed this before earlier in our preparatory discussion, but this pharmaceutical is subject to vigorous clinical trials, and eventually at the top of a pyramid, 1 out of 100 pharmaceuticals succeeds and then is rolled off to the public. Does the scientist transfer the whole liability if anything goes wrong to the manufacturer? I'm sure they do. I'm sure no scientist would accept liability for a certain pharmaceutical if it goes wrong. So I think whatever happens in the manufacture of a nanomaterial, and say in the present SABYDOMA project, we are developing technology to actually develop safe nano, that when we've eventually transferred all these technologies to our 4 case study companies, which we will be doing throughout this project, there will be a clause in our agreement that the particular technology we transferred to the company, if anything goes wrong and the material is hazardous, that we don't take the liability as scientists, but the liability is transferred to the manufacturer. So in the case of pharmaceuticals, we have the example, we have a various number of examples. I mean, the oldest one, I'm sure you're familiar with it, is the case study for thalidomide in the mid-50s, when this was marketed as a drug for treating morning sickness, and it was marketed as a wonder drug because it did relieve morning sickness, but then it proved to be an absolute disaster in causing deformations to the fetus. It took a great long time for the company who marketed it in the Germany to actually accept liability for compensation, but eventually the victims did get compensation. But there were scientists, obviously academic scientists, working on that compound before it was transferred to the company, and I'm very sure they didn't have any liability in the compensation. Actually, I was working myself, but my family were working in the advertising business at the time, and they were responsible for advertising thalidomide, but they certainly didn't accept any liability for the advertisement of this marketing of this compound. It went to the original company who rolled it out. The same applies to medical implants. We're involved with making medical, with testing medical implants in SABYDOMA, namely teeth implants. So using a safety by design strategy, but I'm sure that when we transfer the full testing technology to the company involved, which is Rescol, medical implants have been known to fail. I know this very well, but all the liability in case there's a failure of that implant will rest with the company and not us. And it applies equally to the design of aircraft materials. If aircraft materials fail, it's not the scientists who develop those materials using a safe by design strategy, it's the actual company. So in conclusion to the question, I am not worried because by turning safety by design into a legal principle, will it entail a shift in the liability of exposure from industrialists to scientists? I'm not worried about that, because the scientist is always protected by a legal agreement called Heads of Terms Agreement in the UK between the scientist and industrialist, and in that there should always be a clause who accepts liability in the event of failure. Okay. Sorry, I was a bit wordy. I thought a lot about it actually for 3 days. So.
I know, Andrew, and thank you very much for this very detailed development. And I will then have a very short question, in fact, for Professor Maja Dusinska. And my question being, what do we put in the word safe when we speak about safe by design?
Thank you, Anthony. I was thinking about this word. It's a very important word for human being and for all actually living system, because being safe and safe is absolutely crucial for human being. This is basic biological need for surviving. So we all want to be safe, individually secure our family, secure human being. And this we can see also here in this COVID pandemic situation. Every letter almost I get, it's finished with the word stay safe. So safe means it's a very sensitive also. So it means free from harm or risk, being secure. And for safe product or nanomaterials means reliable or trustworthy. But from scientific point of view, as a genetic toxicologist, I know that nothing can be, or almost nothing can be 100% safe. We could come to the father of toxicology, Paracelsus, 500 years ago, and this is still applying, that what does matter is a dose and dose response relationship. So the right dose differentiate between poison or harmful product and a safe product. And from a risk assessment point of view, from regulatory perspective, as I am also working in this area, so to assess or to quantify the risk, of course, there is a procedure of hazard identification, exposure assessment, dose response assessment, and risk characterization, where the precautionary principle is already implemented, because we don't have enough, in most cases, don't have enough data, and therefore we need to include so-called safety factor, which gives kinds of secure or safe concentration, which we can consider as a safe. And of course, because of the being safe product, it means in certain conditions being safe, and also the behavior of person who is using it. So it's a safe also in terms of specific use. So it is important that that the risk management is taking place, and also this risk is properly communicated, and that means it was already said many times today that it needs a good risk governance or safe by design governance. So I think from the safe by design point of view, it's really important to implement it, and also to put it in the context of risk assessment. But as Ignacy said, it can't be replaced. Safe by design can't replace risk assessment, but it could speed up sustainable and innovative production. So, and also in the context of good risk governance. So it's a complex issues, I would say. But as being safe, just to answer, it's really very important how it is communicated to public.
Thank you very much, Maria, to give a very short answer to a short question that could have taken hours. Thank you very much, Maria. I'm now turning to the two authors of a recent monograph, The Science and Practice of Resilience. I'm speaking, in fact, of Dr. Igor Linkov and Dr. Benjamin Trump. And I will start, before asking them the question, by quoting their own book, The Science and Practice of Resilience, published by Springer in 2019. And in the conclusion, you wrote, upholding the risk-resilience distinction is not only a scholarly need, but also a policy necessity. Applying a risk-based approach to a problem that requires a resilience-based solution, or vice versa, will not provide the correct tools for a given job and will lead to investments that do not produce necessary changes requested by stakeholders. Do you think, and the question is really for the two of you, that this distinction is relevant for the safe by design approach and influences or could influence the possibility of its integration in legal systems?
Yeah, let me start, since Ben already had half an hour. This is Igor. I do believe this universal issue, and of course it's relevant to safety by design, and thank you for looking at our book. So basically, for those of you who are new to the field of resilience, resilience means ability to recover from disruptions. And quicker and faster you recover, more resilient you are. In the context of nanosafety and nanotechnology, let's imagine that everything is so-called safe. Doesn't mean that we really avoid all situations by designing safe nano product, that it will be no failure and some of this product will be found unsafe. Of course not. History shows that what we believe is safe proved to be unsafe in the future. And Andrew just gave an example of that. We need to use all the metrics that we can to increase safety of our products, as Ira was talking about in previous presentation. But we also need to think what happens if the product is found to be unsafe. Can we recall it from the market? Can we have antidote of some kind? It's difficult for me to think in the context of nano, but for SynBio, for example, and Ben can talk more about that, we have kill switches in genetically modified mosquitoes that we developed to kill other mosquitoes, right? So we can kill them. So it may be some equivalent consideration in nanomaterials and nano product design. So to answer the question, excellent question that you posed, I do believe that resilience and risk are connected, and safety by design should be attempted, and our project will do that. But we also need to think about resilience by design, or as we call it now, resilience by intervention. If we cannot design a system to be resilient, we need to think about having something outside of the system to make to prevent propagation of failures resulting from unsafe system. Over. Maybe Ben can add to that.
So a couple quick comments because I know we're running short. So first, probably tangentially related, the single most important thing. So my background, again, I'm a public health scholar, largely from political science, so I'm not a lawyer, but looking at institutions and regulators, in order to make safety by design work, and again, we're pulling from a number of disciplines and ideas that have been discussed and refined, not for years, but for decades. The single most important thing to be doing is to define mechanisms to parameterize safety by design, or at least provide some metrics where we can judge and assess performance towards safety by design. Now, to the question of resilience, and should it be influencing legal approaches? I'll take it from a regulatory and institutional perspective. When you're talking about hazard and consequence, at the end of the day, a lot of the focus is upon, like, what is the absolute level of lost function or harm that could be given to humans, animals, and the environment. And these approaches, as others have said, have done very well, and they should be continued and refined as we gain more knowledge of the science of nanotechnology and other fields that would benefit from safety by design. So let me start by saying risk assessment can and should continue as a critical leg of risk governance and of broader technology governance. But at the same time, there's a second half of the story, which is, as Igor mentioned, things will go wrong. There is no such thing as a perfect system, and the universe tends to have a sick sense of humor. The previous year is probably evidence of that. But so given that things can and will go wrong, and that no amount of testing will ever make any material, product, or technology perfect, or at least free from physical harm, we can and should do everything that we can to promote safety at the earliest levels of development, but at the same time, look to see what are the different mechanisms to promote recovery from loss. So on one end, when risk is looking at absolute magnitude of loss, a resilience-based approach, while also looking at that first part of the equation, requires us to look at, okay, assuming that things can and will go wrong, and that we cannot prevent everything, though we will try. What are the implementations? What are the structures? What are the changes to our system, or at least the way that materials and products are designed to quickly promote recovery from that loss, so that those that are affected, humans, animals, the environment, those that are affected by unintended exposure or unintended consequences from a given hazard can quickly recover their lost function or any lost component of health as quickly as possible. So should it be done? Should we have this recovery-minded focus towards health? Certainly not by itself, but I think it is a strong complement to risk assessment. Things like this absolutely should be considered, if anything, if nothing else, as an insurance policy to the fact that emerging technologies and emerging materials are incomplete in our knowledge set. We will always be learning more. We will always continue to be surprised, though we will try to reduce risk. Because at the end of the day, if there is a way to think about integrating principles of recovery into expanding safety by design to include expeditious recovery when the uncertain and the unfortunate does happen, there is a lot of downstream benefit, and I think that it will go a long way to actually making the commercial products in this field far more easy to bring to the marketplace, and honestly far easier at least to insure against potential losses, just because implicitly that component of recovery will reduce downstream costs related to, again, unintended exposure, unintended consequences. There's a lot that I could go into in this, but I'll stop for time, and thanks for the question.
Thank you, Igor and Ben. I'm now asking a question to everyone, and I will ask you to be very short and concise, maximum 1 minute, just much more like a yes or no. No need to further develop. We still have 3 years in the project to do it and to provide maybe an answer to that question. And that question being more precisely, do you think that legal systems actually need to address safe by design approaches at all? And more precisely, provide legal definitions and or mechanism. Whoever wants to start answering the question?
This is Igor. Yeah, for me, the answer is obvious, especially given what Ira was presenting as an example and what's happening now with all these big tech companies basically ignoring many issues and prefer to pay fees. So legal system is crucial. Over.
Okay, thank you, Igor. Another opinion?
It is important, and I think it could speed up sustainable innovation. And also, of course, it can't be replaced, risk assessment, but at least risk assessor could look at how the nanomaterial was developed, and that could also speed up the evaluation, final evaluation.
Yes, I agree with, I do think legal systems must address safe by design approaches. Of course they must. And more precisely provide legal definitions and mechanisms. Yes, there's got to be a really good communication between the lawyers and the innovators. I think that's really important.
So I guess a real quick response to add on would be, the short answer is, of course, yes, but there's a but. And that but is the legal field cannot do it alone, nor can the regulatory field. There is a critical need to be continuing to refine, one, clear understanding that at least at a generalizable level across pedagogies, across fields, and across countries about what safety by design is, much like we've done in the biotechnology field over the past 20, 25 years. And at the same time, most urgently, is to provide operational benchmarks that define how we can implement and measure progress towards safety by design. That is a really difficult task, and it's not going to be solved quickly. But being able to provide those benchmarks and those gold standards is what's going to get you to a much more effective and much more globalizable regulatory apparatus and set of principles than starting from scratch. It's a bit of a chicken before the egg question, but I think that's defining regulatory parameters and gold standard benchmarks on the scientific side is what a lot of us can be doing to assist the legal field in better meeting the challenge of conforming safety by design through legal instruments. Thanks.
Yeah, what I would say is that what we need is that the legal system needs to find ways to incorporate the safety by design approach. I think that just producing a nice piece of legislation will not help. I think that first of all, we need to understand in practice what means safety by design. And when we have the parameters, when we know how to do that, perhaps we can talk about making something, a legal test on that. But I am with Ben on that. First of all, we need to operationalize safety by design within the actual system and see what came from there.
Yes, I do agree. Of course, also I think that some of the current recipes, methodologies provided by the safe by design approach could and should become mandatory. Of course, I'm certain of that. But I have also the concern that if we make all mandatory, if we go only into legal things, the risk is to lose a little bit of the spirit of safe by design, and in particular the goodwill of actors to improve the safety of the products, and also the conscience of the responsibility of many actors in achieving this kind of safety. And it is the only risk that I know that I see to the regulation, in fact.
Thank you very much. And now I'm switching to the next question, which is for Andrew Nelson, Igor Linkov, and Benjamin Trum. And the question is, again, very short, just provide a few elements. Do you think that safe by design is limited to the field of nanomaterial sciences?
Well, I mean, I can start here. I thought about this, and I mean, the others can follow in, please do, but it's not limited to nanomaterial sciences. It's not at all. It applies to anything that involves safety and design. So it applies to pollution, it applies to climate change, it certainly applies to the present epidemic. I mean, I could have shown how it does, but it certainly applies to the present epidemic and how it's being managed. I think it's just a very, very general concept, philosophical concept in public health management. And I think just to apply it to nanomaterial sciences, I think you lose so much. I think it's certainly a good example in drug design and development. I don't have to say more. What do other people think?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Andrew. Igor, Ben?
Yeah, I agree. Basically, safety is universal concept, and we design different things. So we apply safety by design in engineering, in biotechnology, and other fields. It's not formalized. I think what's happening with nano, it's interesting. We may be formalizing some of this concept for at least the field of emerging materials. But obviously in engineering, we don't call it safety by design, but we do it. It's just uncertainty in emerging materials is unprecedented compared to what we have in engineering. And we need to develop new methods and tools to do that. And that's, I guess, why they're getting paid big money in this project and others to start doing this in the context of high uncertainty. And suggesting new governance structure for that. But yeah, this is exciting, and I'm glad to be part of that. Over.
So I guess very quickly, is safety by design limited to the field of nanomaterial sciences? Of course not. And if I had to condense this to a soundbite, it's safety by design is not a nanotechnology problem, and it's not a technology problem. Safety by design is a governance problem. It's, at the end of the day, it is an approach intended to help us deal with uncertainty related to three things: understanding the future, identifying different mechanisms towards the risk sciences hazard exposure effect, and then third is looking at the legal, social, and governmental implications that uncertainty may have. Those three are not necessarily in order, and they occur at the same time. But when we're trying to solve those questions, this governance problem, safety by design is intended to be a mechanism that we can begin to streamline or at least characterize the uncertainty that we have. We're not omniscient, and we can't perfectly predict the future, but we can at least look at the bounds of the possible and the unpossible, and potentially the impossible. So within this, for nanotechnology, the challenge is that nanotechnology has developed in many different respects and many subfields for decades. Some much more than others. And within this, applying safety by design late in the game, and it's certainly not too late, but it's later than we would like, becomes difficult because we have to shift institutional norms and field practices to fit within safety by design. There are other fields that are not quite as developed or not as far along that applying safety by design now is far less painful, or at least far less confusing. So as a governance approach, there's a lot that we can do with safety by design beyond nanotechnology, beyond AI, and certainly beyond even technologies in general. But as a field of practice, it's how can we be thinking about characterizing, understanding, and reducing risk at the earliest stages of where a potential problem may arise, so that the range of outcomes that we might have are far more preferable in the aggregate. Over.
Thank you to the three of you. And I'm now asking the next question to Fernand Rideau. Fernand, do you see any room for greater convergence between the by design principles? We have had the presentation from Professor Robinstein earlier today on privacy by design, but we have also been in by design that Mirella Mitinin covers in a publication from last year. And of course, safe by design, we are discussing extensively today. Are there any philosophical, ethical dimensions we should be aware of or take into account?
Yes, many thanks for these questions, Anthony. From my point of view, it's quite a difficult question, but I'm trying to reply to it in a few words. You are perfectly right in mentioning that the different by design approaches are developing, and you mentioned these approach, but we could have mentioned also sustainable by design, or value sensitive design, ethical by design, and so on. And of course, I think that these approaches are very interesting, and I do encourage, of course, this kind of approach, because they are manifesting a kind of upstream approach to the different problems, which is always better. And it's also manifesting a kind of responsibilization of the producer and of the designers themselves relatively to the long-term effects of their activities. So, of course, for all these reasons, the approach by design is very interesting. But we could also nevertheless mention some of the inherent limitation of this approach. And in particular, if I take the safe by design approach, you know probably that for some people it is intrinsically insufficient in terms of safety, just because the safety of, as you have mentioned already, there is always an uncertainty in terms of safety, and the safety of a technology depends also on the behavior of the downstream actors in the value chain of this technology, such as users and operators and so on. So you cannot deal totally with safety only in terms of safety by design. And I would say that it's the same for sustainable by design. For some people, sustainable by design is a kind of dream, because you must count on the rebound effect each time you design a technology, and you must count on the behavior of the factors, and the design as such is insufficient for dealing with all that. And I'd like to mention also that if you want to make something ethical by design, it is also problematic, because from my point of view, from a philosophical point of view, only the humans do ethics and provide ethics to the things, and not the things themselves. So a design cannot be ethical as such. From my point of view, you cannot enclose ethics in a design. Of course, a technical design can provide a technical design provided to something can probably influence the kind of use you can have of this design, but it cannot fully determine, from my point of view, this use. And from my point of view, humans have always a kind of freedom concerning the use they want to make about a technology. You know, you can make you can use the same technology, be it nanotechnology or something else, for a good or for a bad purpose. And it is your freedom, and also it is your own judgment to make this good, to make these things good or bad. And so, of course, you can influence the use probably, but you cannot fully determine this use. So, for this reason, I think that ethical by design is something problematic. And of course, nevertheless, is that what is true is that one thing is never only a thing. Of course, a design is always incorporating more or less hidden social preferences, social values, and every designer makes value-sensitive design naturally, of course. But from my point of view, it is better if these incorporated values can be made explicit and can be discussed upstream in a democratic manner. It would be very, very better from my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernand, for your answer. I'm now asking the next question to Maja Dusinska and Ignacy Gispert, and the question will be the following: do safe by design approaches require more flexible intellectual property regimes, if not merely open access?
Okay, so we still have do not have a definition, or we see what maybe differently what safe by design means, and I always see it that implementation safety consideration early in development of products. So from this point of view, I think they should be at least several steps which should be similar or the same. So I see it as some kinds of guide how to deal with safe by design. From this point of view, of course, as a guideline or guided document, it should be open for everyone, because at least in NanoReg and NanoReg 2 project I was partner, we developed or safe by design approach was developed as a kind of stage gate approach. And I think that it was very good way how you can deal with safe by design. So yes, from my side, answer is definitely yes.
Yeah, from my side, just two quick comments. One is that open innovation is an European Union policy driver. And an open innovation requires more flexible intellectual property regimes, that's for sure. So safety by design approach requires openness regarding processes, strategies, and the values embedded. Here, just an example. We have been talking this afternoon about the QSAR models. Funny enough, there are QSAR models that the software, the algorithm, are protected, intellectually protected. So that means a huge contradiction, saying, okay, I have a QSAR model trying to define risk, but I cannot know how the algorithm has been created. So that doesn't make sense. So certainly, yes, we need a more flexible intellectual property regimes.
Thank you very much to the two of you for your answers. And now with the final question of this roundtable, that is a question to everyone. With this first legal workshop reaching its end, my question will be twofold. What do you expect from the project from now on, and especially on the legal side? And what do you expect that we should discuss at the second legal workshop at the end of the project? So probably taking place in the last 6 months of the project. Any of you can start?
Well, it's Andrew here. I think, I mean, I've learned so much, and I think what I've learned is how much I don't know about the subject and how much I need to know. So what do I expect from this workshop? I think it should be written up and recorded. I think we've certainly made a lot of contacts and we've certainly posed a lot of questions, but I'd really like to go through the recording again in detail to get more familiar with everything. Now, I think it's been absolutely fabulous. We have to write a deliverable on this workshop, and I think, Anthony, you're leading it, but I think that deliverable could be really exciting to read, and I'm very happy to work with you on it. I might improve my knowledge. I think I just hope that a lot of other people, a lot of my scientific colleagues who've attended have learned something as well. Right, what should we discuss at the second legal workshop? I think this is very clear because by then we'll have a lot of results from the project. The technologies will be transferred to varying degrees, and I think we should discuss exactly what aspects of everything which has been developed will be subject to legal control or legal agreements, especially with those technologies which will be being signed over to the end users, who are the 4 case study companies. Okay, sorry I talked too long.
Thank you, Andrew.
For me, this was very inspiring workshop. I learned a lot, and I see that this is just a start. Also, many times risk governance and test beds and other very related topics were addressed. So I would suggest to start closer collaboration with the governance projects and NanoRigo, Go for Nano, and RISCON, as well as Safe by Design sister projects, because I think it would be very important together, and also we can get maximized impact from the collaborations, because I think it's important topic. There are lots of questions, and we can really make progress if we include a collaboration with other projects and organize the bigger workshop, even bigger than this one, of course, by Anthony and by SABYDOMA and Work Package 6. So I really think that it will be good to start the series of workshops. And this brainstorming is just wonderful to exchange views. So that's all from me.
Thank you, Maria.
I take the chance. I would say that my proposal will be to be able to propose specific tools that deliver operationalization of safety by design within nano governance, and how we can incorporate those tools in the current legal framework. So I am very much focused on trying to get real results of operationalizing all those ideas of safety by design, and because let's say that I am very much concerned about what happens with responsible research and innovation, and that kind of disappearing of a concept that I am afraid that if we do not apply or find out the way of really making operationalization the concept, we will have another kind of failure on that and we will be losing a lot of hours and efforts. Thank you.
Ignacy, do you think it is achievable within the SABYDOMA, or it would be good to have this goal and work in cooperation with governance projects and other Safe by Design projects?
For sure, as much collaboration as possible, it's important. For us, I think Andrew and me are extremely thankful to Andrew for letting lawyers entering the scientific world, let's say. But I think that we need to share, and I really think that the European Union expects us to collaborate as much as possible, all the European projects that are working on that direction.
Perfect.
Well, it's perhaps something we can do through Working Group E in the nano safety cluster. I'll put it on the agenda to work on this particular aspect. But we're doing this anyway because we're now working with Claire Mace in Simlog and Socko, the Sabina. So I think we'll bring this up on the agenda with the next Working Group E. Working Group E is in fact agglomeration of all the Safety by Design projects. There are, I think, 6 of them now. So we also work through the governance projects through Maria. Okay, that's all.
Thank you. Yes, hey, thank you, Andrew. And now I'm asking the same question to Fernand, to Igor, to Ben.
Yeah. What can I say? What I can say is that, of course, I think this Safe by Design or Safer by Design approach is very, very important and essential today. To be sincere, I don't know yet myself if Safe by Design is still a set of methodologies, of recipes for making nanomaterials safer in terms of hazard, in terms of exposure, possible exposure, and so in terms of risk, and or if Safe by Design is really a new governance approach related to the safety of nanomaterials. I don't have I'm not able to reply to that today. And of course, if SABYDOMA can provide interesting things in terms of that, I would be really interested in knowing these results. And I can just mention a few words that I'm also involved in a project called NanoFamNet. And we want to develop a hub for sustainable nanofabrication. We have a big work package on sustainability, encompassing safety issues, life cycle sustainability issues, ethics and governance issues. And we would like also to succeed in making links between the different actors, between the stakeholders in nanofabrication, the services providers in terms of safety, in terms of Safe by Design, and so on. So, of course, I remain very interesting concerning all the developments of your project.
So I would say that we probably are not going to solve all the challenges of nanotechnology and Safety by Design by the end of this project. It would be great if we could. But it's going to be a marathon and certainly not a sprint. But I think that what we can do is provide a clear platform to begin to talk about Safety by Design from different fields and with different ideas in a way that is coherent. That's what the field is lacking. And if we can provide a bit more structure and at least provide some suggestions about how we all can talk about our ideas with Safety by Design, how to think about it as a philosophy, a practice, a set of guidance and principles and gold standards. that's going to be a massive win, not just for nanotech, but for other fields as well. So I think that's certainly an achievable goal. It's a difficult goal, but that's what I would strive for.
Thank you very much, Ben. Well, then, we have reached the end not only of this roundtable, and we can be very thankful to our 6 panelists who have taken time to prepare this roundtable and to share even their personal views on these quite challenging questions. Now, in terms of conclusion for today's workshop, we have had speakers from all over the world covering different legal systems, and we have seen that the comparison is quite sometimes difficult to make because the level of integration of institutions is not the same, but we can certainly draw lessons from today's workshop, and even on the legal side. There will be a further follow-up. There will be deliverables coming out of this workshop and more precisely the work package 6 of the project. I thank not only all the speakers, but also all the attendees for their participation in this workshop. You will receive a feedback questionnaire later on. Please answer to the feedback questionnaire. It is very important for us, as you know, some of you are also involved in open projects. It is very important that we can improve and amend future events, because there will be, as you understood, there will be a second workshop, at least a second legal workshop, but that will be at the end of the project. Doesn't mean that there won't be any intermediary events smaller than these, but of course documents and materials related to this workshop will be circulated, provided that we have received, of course, a consent of the authors of these documents and materials, and of course you will also receive information about our project's next activities. So here we are just reaching the end of the workshop. We have already spent quite a few hours. It was quite, I would say, challenging to organize it in the middle of I would say, a health crisis. Thank you very much to everyone, and meet you at the later stage of this project or elsewhere. Thank you very much.